4, 3, 2, 1. Yes.
Bom dia, bem-vindos. 20 de outubro, Porto Alegre. Com alegria, estamos encerrando o Seminário Internacional Dança, Saúde e Arquivos Digitais. Este é o nosso 6º encontro. Meu nome é Suzi Weber, sou professora, pesquisadora de dança e teatro. Essa palestra está sendo realizada no âmbito de uma disciplina oferecida em conjunto por 2 programas de pós-graduação, Ciências do Movimento Humano e Artes Cênicas, organizadas pelas professoras Aline Haas, Mônica Dantas e Suzi Weber, envolvendo 2 grupos de pesquisa, grupo de pesquisa em arte, corpo e educação, grupo de pesquisa em práticas de formação, criação, documentação em dança e performance. Agradeço essa fecunda parceria entre nós 3, professoras, mulheres, mães, artistas da dança, das artes da cena. A pandemia da Covid-19 nos trouxe muitas angústias e tristezas e expôs e acentuou diferenças de classe, gênero e raça e fez do Brasil um dos países com maior número de índices de mortes, com índices que atestam a negligência de nossos governantes com a saúde e o bem-estar da população. A necessidade de distanciamento social nos fez migrar para o mundo digital e já faz 1 ano e meio que estamos nos relacionando nos quadradinhos. Paradoxalmente, foi esse contexto que nos impulsionou a realizar esse seminário. Pensamos que seria o momento de compartilhar algumas oportunidades que tivemos ao longo de nossas carreiras como pesquisadoras e que tem nos possibilitado o encontro e colaboração com centros de pesquisa fora do Brasil. A estrutura com a qual nos acostumamos de modo remoto é essa aqui, plataforma digital, nossas casas, campainha tocando, alunas, alunos, é isso aí. Tá? Desenhamos então essa proposta de reunir pesquisadoras, pesquisadores internacionais em torno desse tema, dança, saúde e arquivos digitais. Diante da dificuldade de realizar uma tradução consecutiva em salas de aulas virtuais ou da impossibilidade de conseguir recursos econômicos por uma tradução simultânea, optamos por realizar o seminário em inglês. Pedimos desculpas por isso, sabemos o quão excludente e elitista essa atitude pode ser, mas a gente não queria perder essa possibilidade de expandir nossas redes e de realizar trocas com pessoas tão especiais que são referências nos seus campos de conhecimento. Então, a gente tem a alegria de estar aqui hoje com a Thembi Rosa, artista independente, brasileira, Minas Gerais, dançarina, coreógrafa, doutora em artes e mestre e doutora, né? Mestre pela UFBA, doutora pela UFRGS, Artes, tem uma tese intitulada Dança, Arquivos como Invenções. Sua pesquisa entrelaça dança, música e artes digitais, tem se dedicado à realização de performances, vídeos, instalações, invenções urbanas, ela vai contar tudo para a gente. Realizou com Scott DelaHunta o Motion Lab Bank em 2019. Eu muito feliz de te ter aqui, Thembi. Eu vou vou apresentar também o professor Scott DelaHunta. Tá? A gente conheceu o professor Scott na Coventry University, no centro de dança que tem lá o CIDER, né? O Scott trabalha como escritor, pesquisador, organizador de uma série de projetos internacionais, trazendo artes cênicas com foco na produção coreográfica, em conjunto com outras disciplinas e práticas. Atualmente é co-diretor do Motion Bank com Florian Genet, parte do Instituto Designer Labor Gutenberg, hospedado na Hochschule Men's University. De 2010 a 2014, ele foi diretor da primeira fase do Motion Bank, projeto do Foresight Company. É um professor reconhecido em muitas universidades na Europa e outros países. Então, dois pesquisadores de excelência, a gente vai ouvir eles e estamos muito felizes de tê-los. Welcome, Thembi and Scott, please.
Thank you, Suzi.
Thank you, Suzi.
I'd like to start thank you and Monica and Aline for organizing this very nice seminar. I have been following, and I really need to say that I'm happy to be here. And I watched the opening with Sylvie Fortin, and personally, it was something really strong to me, because as you said, we are living this difficult moment for us who are working with the body, and we are having contact only through the screen. And it makes me be more confident in our position as dancer and researcher with this important role with dance and healthy. So it was really, really encouraging me to pursue these things. So I will start to sharing my screen because I'm gonna talk about just a minute. I'm gonna talk about my thesis and about Motion Bank Lab that I have the pleasure to realize in Belo Horizonte with Scott DelaHunta and with many other artists and research. So I will start with my thesis, my PhD thesis that I had the luck to do it before the pandemic, because I'm working with digital archives on dance, and I think if I didn't finish it before the pandemic, it will be endless, because we know that everybody now is producing a lot for the screen. So the title is Dance Archive as Invention. I will just put this, okay. And any problem at any moment, please, you can tell and talk to me or to Suzi, and to try to solve, to have sure that you are listening okay. And Suzi already told a bit about myself. I'm a dancer and choreographer. And I was thinking why I'm looking to digital archives on dance. And since my graduation at literature at UFRGS in Minas Gerais, I started to work with dramaturgy on dance. And I was a researcher at the program Rumos Dança Itaú Cultural during 10 years, from 2000 to 2010. And it's a big program that we were mapping the contemporary dance in Brazil. It was a project with artists and research from all over Brazil. And we have this database that it was very technical. We just mapping the artists, the works, the theater, but we didn't go really deep on the works, on the performance itself. And like thinking just now, it was a kind of a frustration to me that we couldn't go on the creative process, on the choreographical thinking of the choreographers. Of course, it was not the goal of this project. It was really important during the time that we worked on it. We have many publications from Itaú Cultural. But as a researcher and as a dancer, I did my master, I think, in a very strict interaction between my dance practice and the theory. So on my master, I was already working with the idea of my body as archive, because having contact with so many choreographers that I had to interview and to think about their work as a researcher at Rumos Dança. And I decided to make a solo. I'm talking about 20 years ago. I will try to pass through it briefly to really go in now, but I think it's important just to situate it why I'm interested on this question. So in this solo, I invited 4 different choreographers to work with me, and I want to see how my body could deal with this different language. They were Rodrigo Pederneiras from Group Corpo, Adriana Banana, that is a great partner from Brazil. She's the creator of the Fórum Internacional de Dança, FIDE, and Dudu de Herman, who is another choreographer in Belo Horizonte, who works a lot with somatic practice that I have been involved in all my formation, and Luciana. And so in this solo, I was already working with this idea of my body as archive, and I was really interested on documentation, on how to document it, the process that I had with each choreographer. So I always recorded a lot. I have many tapes with the rehearsal, and I always invite them to write about it. And so now looking with some distance from my PhD, it's like these things are emerging now. And specifically on my PhD, I decided to look to the platforms as Motion Bank that you mentioned, that Scott is the co-director of Motion Bank, this amazing 4 years project that it's something that it's really far from our reality in Brazil, and to have a project that we can go so deep and so long. And on my PhD, I'd like to try out to do a hands-on work in the platform. I was not interested on only looking at it and just to describe in how it works. And I had the chance to meet Scott in 2010 in an event in Portugal, organized by Carla Fernandes, that is from Universidade Nova de Lisboa. She's a great partner too. I'm now in her group at Performance and Cognition group in Lisbon. And she organized this big event in 2010. I was finishing my master, and I applied to go there, and she received me, and it was amazing because I could meet Scott and Berta Bermudes, who is a great reference on the digital archives too. She was finishing an installation with Emi Greco, and Chris Ziegler, who developed the DVD, the famous DVD by Forsyth, the improvisational tools. So I was not so connected with technology at that time. I was researching more improvisation and choreography, but then it opens up to me this interest on going more deep on technology. And I'm a gyrotonic and gyrotnez certified teacher as well. And I will show a work that I started to develop on 2012, that I worked with a coder and digital artist. His name is Manuel Guerra. And we start to work with sensors, with Kinect, and with camera. And we are trying to track the movements and to produce this drawing that it was like a map and traces of the choreography. So I started to think if it could be a kind of archives of our dancing, because we could read on this drawing the acceleration, the traces were really thin if we move slow and if we move fast. So I start to come with this idea, and this is something that I brought to my thesis. And we are also in this research working with sound. Since 2000, I work with the musical contemporary duet O Grivo, and everything that we move with the sensors, we are activating and modifying the sound. So the sound could also be some kind of digital register of the choreographer, a different way to think of these archives as inventions, because we are not just talking about a record of the performance, but it's like from my practice, I could realize these different kinds of archiving dancing. And looking to the project as synchronous objects and the motion bank, I realized that we could really go on searching in this interdisciplinarity researchers with code and visual artists, digital artists, to really think about not a translation of the choreographer, but another kind of creation, another kind of visualization of the choreographical thinking. So one of my reference on the thesis, it was this idea of the body, drawing, and dance. So just like drawing, dance is an activity that may well leave marks on a surface. So it's from Laura Kahneman and the Motion Capture Imaginary Digital Handling for Dance Knowledge. She, in this book, she talks a lot about mocap and about all the high technologies that we don't have really access in Brazil, that it's complicated. But I like this idea of thinking that all these digital versions that we have, it comes from something that it's like the drawing. Of course, we can increase it and change it with software and with technology and the artificial intelligence. But it's nice to think about the materiality. And these previous solos that I mentioned, the program, the photo of the program, it was exactly this idea of a floor and the traces that we leave in the floor. So it's already a kind of register also of the choreographer. And this work I made at Grupo Corpo. So it's a linoleum that it's really marked and it's scratched. And it's nice to think that before the digital, we have this analogical and what the body leaves. And so for the idea of archive on my thesis, I worked a lot with this classical book of Derrida, Archive Fever in English, that I don't know why it's Archive Fever, because in Portuguese we call mal de arquivo, and in French also. But he talked about it, I will read this part. And as a guarantee, opus, I pass. Oh, just come back. Okay. Yes, yeah, I will just resume what he's saying, that it's the archive, that what we are archived can tell us about how to archive. So what I found in Motion Bank and in other projects that Scott are involved, even the Shioban Davis, I don't know if I'm pronouncing correct, Shioban Davis from Sarah Watley. And I found a text where she talked exactly it, that what we are archiving can tell us how to archive it. So I like this idea that we are not working with a model. So looking at Motion Bank methodologies, I really realized these openings to be in touch with choreographers, and with each one, with each team of researcher and a multidisciplinary team, to find a specific way to archive each work. So for me, it is the most interesting thing, and it is what I'm interested in doing. not just putting a frame and everybody has to be in a only way of archive, because you know that it does not exist. And so I work also with this idea of the body as archive by Andrea Lepecki, and the archive and the repertoire by Diana Taylor. And this idea of invention, I worked with the anthropologist Roy Wagner and with Brian Masumi, just to pass with some reference that I was working, and also with Ailton Krenak, that at the end of my thesis, I was really interested on taking the voices of the choreographers too. That was a reference all the time in my work. And I think that Ailton Krenak brought these things that we have in lab and on creative process. So I will read just this thing that this book is already translated for English, Ideas to Postpone the End of the World. And he says, our time specializes in creating absence of the meaning of living in society, of the very meaning of the experience of life. This generates a great intolerance towards those who are still able to experience the pleasure of being alive, of dancing, of singing. And it's full of small constellations of people scattered around the world who dance, sing, make it rain. And I think that this kind of lab that we work in dancing together, and it's a kind of ritual that we make these things happen. And I have this work with Margô Assis, that is Parquear Bando, that it's totally tuned with this idea.
Tá sem som, a Thembi.
Oh, serious?
Eu tô ouvindo bem.
Eu também, Cláudia.
Estamos ouvindo bem.
Yes, I continue or try
Yes,
to...
please. A gente está entendendo bem, Thembi. Tá ok.
Okay. So, Parquear Bando, and it's this idea of a public intervention that we usually make an open call, and it's a short residence that we share the structure and this idea of work with the bamboo as an extension of our body. And this work we started in a park in Belo Horizonte, and the bamboos come from a material that we had found in the park, and we call it as a deceleration dispositive, because we put these things of find our axis and balancing the bamboo in the top of our head. And it provokes a totally different state in the body and in the mind. And we realized that if we go to the central areas of the city, it will be like more paradoxical than just doing it in the nature that we are already more connected. So we decided to work with this piece in more central areas. And this is one of the pieces that we decided to make the digital annotation at Motion Bank Lab. Parquear Bando, it was one of the pieces, and Dorothée and Matthias with a piece called Balls and Ropes, and Dudu de Herman with a projetista. So we have a trailer in the site, but I will not run because I think our time is running, and I want to enter in the site, so everybody can. I will leave the link, and you can watch the trailer and to understand a bit of this short lab. It was only 5 days, and for sure, if it was not, let me try to pass. Okay. If it was not the large experience of Scott on coordinating this kind of lab with so many different peoples, we were not able to produce the material because it was a lot of things to do in only 5 days, and we continued the work later to put the Motion Bank Lab sites available for people. We continue this work with Carla Fernandes. We decided to record the first day of the workshop, and we have, I will put on the site now, just to running. So we have the annotation, let me just change here. So this is the technology developed by Motion Bank project that we have the Peacemaker, but I think Scott will explain better. But it's this software that we can record the video, we can put it on YouTube or at Vimeo, and we can make the annotations on the video. So for Parquear Bando, we are interested on see, our question was if people could do this public intervention without me and Margô. We have this question, and we developed more this question in an article that I have written with Carla. I will show it later. So what's nice from this device here is that because we can go exactly to some tags, to some notes that that we select. For instance, we have something that we call the knots. That's something that we do with the bamboo. So if I go to this part in blue, we can go directly to what I want to share. We don't need to be searching on the video. So it's a very nice things to work on documentation for choreographer and for other things that we want to show exactly the annotation with the videos. So it's open, everybody can navigate it and try out the site. It's available. And we did it on the streets, and it's also a challenge to make an annotation because we know that in each place that we are going to do this public intervention, it will be different. It's never the same. Even if you have a structure for composition, it will be always changed because of the traffic, people that we are meeting, and the architecture. So we already don't have this a position, if it's possible, only to do it through a digital online score, or if we have to be present. We never try out to see if another group could realize this intervention without our presence, only through the online score. It's the article that I had that I'm talking more deeply about the documentation of the Parquear Bando digital annotation. I made this paper with Carla, and it's available in this nice journal organized by Scott. I shared the link so people can also see it. And before doing the Motion Bank Lab, we did in Belo Horizonte a choreographic coding lab, that it's another project coordinated by Scott too. So before having the experience of doing the Motion Bank, we did a short choreographic coding lab. And I brought this conversation between Anton Kopp, that is the coder from Motion Bank Project, and Scott. And that they are discussing exactly this idea of the collaboration among the choreographers, the choreography and the interactive coding. Because one of the things of connecting choreographer and technology, I think that it's idea of the embodiment and how the coders or digital artists could try the choreographical thinking. I think it makes a great difference in the kind of the documentation that we have. So on my PhD, I also work with graduating students at UFRGS. They are people from digital arts and from films. And I proposed the practice of parquearbando, and they created the digital visualization. Yeah, I put a short video too that is here just to have an image that we recorded it, and each one create a short animation of what they experienced with the bamboos. It was really just a way to practice and later on to create a digital archives on it. And they were really I showed them the synchronous object and the motion banks, so clearly they were in a way inspired by it. This is just the dots are the connections of the bamboos. He just accelerated it and put where it was going. And this one, they were struggle and think it as a machinery, so it's his way of representing it. It is also on my YouTube. It was just a short experience. Yeah, this was from the lab. And I think it's it. I think I talked a lot.
Take your time. Okay.
And I shared the links, and we can put it on YouTube or on the chat if people want to have access to, and my mail. And I open to questions later if someone wants to put some things. It will be a pleasure to listen you later.
Thank you, Thembi. That was really, I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed your presentation because some of your thesis work I know a little bit about, but to see a kind of summary and some of the core ideas that relate to this this kind of topic of the access to choreographic thinking. I feel that it was very central to the presentation and the concerns you had when you first worked on those archives in the beginning, that you were sad that you couldn't access that. I'll share my screen. Now, let's see here. Okay. I will try to follow. I think I made several notes to give some insight into the work that has resulted from the many years of research and the good fortune I had to be involved in some really exciting and, as Thembi said, well-resourced projects in Europe, working with choreographers and their companies, because I think that I entered those projects a little similar to Thembi. I was really interested in accessing the creative process or the choreographic thinking. And I felt that it was valuable to try to share that with other people, especially people who weren't in the studio. And this could also be people from other disciplines. And that has been my my wish, you could say, and the thing that's motivated me throughout the last 20 years. And I think it's based in my own background as a dancer and a choreographer, which was in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, and interacting with other choreographers and just being an artist and being so excited by the way in which they could see the world and make sense of the world. And as I moved, sort of shifted into academia, I began to feel that there was not enough of that understanding accepted into academia. And some people call it arts practice research. Back then, it wasn't such a strong topic, kind of practice-based research in the academy. But nevertheless, I think that's what I became interested in trying to explore, is what happens if you bring dancing knowledge out of the studio and share it with others. And then the projects I got involved with were all sort of manifestations in a way of that desire on my part and also all my collaborators. But now what I want to share with you a little bit relates to the very last comment that Thembi drew attention to, this quote from Anton Koch. That's Anton's words. And he refers to, you may not have seen it so quickly, but at one point he speaks in the middle of that to not interfering with existing workflows. And I think what Anton was saying is that the technical apparatus, whatever digital technology or programming that might take place in this context, would not interrupt the workflow of the choreographer or the dancer. So the idea was to integrate these tools into that workflow. We could discuss that. There are different perspectives on that, but I would like to stick with the idea of the workflow. And the picture I'm sharing here with you is a studio in Malta. And in front of, directly in front there with her back to us is the choreographer, Rosemary Lee. And Rosie's making a multi-generational piece with 24 performers ranging from the age 7 to 72, and it's called Threaded Fine. And it involves each individual performer learning a solo that Rosie made. I think the solo is about 10 to 12 minutes long. And then they learn it, and she gives them images and she coaches them as they learn it, gives them a sense of what's meaningful to her and what she thinks is meaningful about the solo. Has a lot to do with the environment, has a lot to do with connecting with their inner selves, and they're connecting that to the outer world. And then as they learn and practice it, they begin to make the solo their own. So they take over the solo and they start expressing themselves in the work. So what, in the end, you have this long sequence of solos that lasts for 5 hours. It was performed in the theater in Valletta, I think for 2 nights, maybe just 1 night actually. A 5-hour piece, durational, people can come and go. Many people stayed the whole time because every individual performer, as they come out from age 7 to age 72, looks distinctly different, but they're performing the same material. And I hope my description gives you some idea about what the experience might be of watching individuals bringing themselves into the space, performing the same kind of material, but being very different, with quite haunting soundtrack played by her son on the side. So when I knew Rosie was going to make this piece, I asked her if I could document the piece, because I wanted to share with people who were not in the studio with her here how the piece was made and the experience of the people who were participating in the learning of the piece. And that is, that follows the same line of thinking and the same kind of motivation that Thembi has just referred to when she shared the Brazil lab and trying to publish material online about Paquiabando, with the view that maybe that knowledge could be picked up by people who weren't able to join what happened at that time. So it's the same kind of idea, to share this knowledge with others who weren't there, didn't have a chance to be there. And what I wanted to say, though, is about workflow. And so it's not about the workflow of the dancers so much in the space, although I'm not disturbing them at all. I'm sitting here, you'll see my notebook there. My glasses, the same ones I have on right now, I think, although those might have been broken and these might be new ones. The same pens that I have here, actually the same kind of notebook. And I'm observing what's happening in the space. I'm not looking through a camera, and yet there is a camera on, but I'm looking at what's happening directly in front of me, and I'm taking notes, because my workflow as an observer, and even as a maker, when I was making things, was to make notes very quickly on the side without really thinking about it, almost an automatic process of just noting what was happening in front of me so that I might return to it later to maybe think about it again or recover some sort of idea or image. And that kind of workflow is what the annotation tool supports. So the computer you see on the left here is running the annotation system, Peacemaker, that Thembi referred to. And I can type notes whenever I see something that's interesting to me. I can make a mark. You don't even have to type anything. All you have to do is hit a key, and it puts a mark at that time in the video. And then you can return to it later and revise the annotation and edit it. And you kind of integrate that into your process of taking notes. So I guess I wanted to present this from the perspective of my workflow as an observer, which was not interrupted in any way by the kind of digital technology. It was very, let's say, a natural process. The other thing I would say about it is that even though we're referring to it as digital annotation, it's a very analog process, obviously. I'm relying entirely on what it is that I can see with my biological eyes. There's no computer vision involved. It's entirely down to the things that I notice, bringing my own experience of noticing things into that space and deciding in some intuitive way what's important or not important, and labeling, naming, drawing it. And that is a very analog process in the context of all of this digital. Now, let me look at the time quickly. That's kind of a long explanation. So the next slide I want to show you is where this all started. And here's another, this is also an analog process. This is the version of Peacemaker that William Forsythe's company used between the years of around 2008 and 2014. And this process also had somebody observing from not behind the camera, but just watching what was in front and typing notes. As you'll see, there are notes here on the right. And so notes with names of the performers. This happens to be Yoni and Manchi. And some very brief, capturing some very brief what's happening in the space in front of her. Now, this software was developed by David Curran, a dancer in the company, a self-taught programmer. He brought together a number of different sort of tools and assembled this annotation system so that they could find things in the video later. When they wanted to go back to something that had occurred 2 or 3 weeks ago, they could quite easily find that material. And that really is the main motivation, was to create some kind of library in which video moments were findable in the context of a rehearsal process or a creation process. This was never intended to be public. So in fact, it's not public, which is kind of sad because it's a hugely rich archive of choreographic thinking, but it's not public. And it was never intended to be public, which is kind of interesting because most of the other things that I'm going to show you are intended to be public. And it kind of brings up the process question of what happens when you do record material, record things that happen in the privacy of a studio, and the kinds of permissions that you should attain or have before you even enter the space. So the image that you saw of me earlier sitting on the side, I had already spoken to everybody in that space. They'd given me permission to be there. They'd given me permission to publish something as long as they could all check it out before it went online. And we formed a kind of, the conditions were of a lot of trust. So in this situation, those agreements were not made, and that this then material, in some very rightful sense, should probably remain not public. So I'm going to show you one more example of using the software later, because if you're aware of the Motion Bank website, you may not be, but one of the artists who we feature on the Motion Bank website from the first 4 years is a woman named Deborah Hay, a choreographer named Deborah Hay. So in this instance, we used the annotation tool, the same tool, but it looks differently. I'm going to show you what it looks like. It looks like this now. So that's the same tool underneath, under the hood. It's the same thing as this, just looks different, like this. And this is material that we processed after it was videoed. So it wasn't live video annotation. We were studying the material. We made many, many, many recordings, and then we annotated them according to the different sections of the score. Because part of the process of manual annotation is to make decisions about what things get named. And the naming of things can become very important and can take a lot of time. In this instance, we didn't spend a lot of time with names, but we did associate different sections of her score. So what you're reading here is the score that Deborah gave the dancers. The dancers know how to perform the score. They practice it for many weeks, months before they perform. And these different sections were given names. Now those names, you see Curve Path, Link to Portal, Ancient Voice One, those were the kinds of names that the choreographer Deborah just used in the studio. So she never thought about them ending up being an annotation. So she didn't think ahead. You know, she just said to Roz or to one of the other dancers, Janine, she would just say, you know, when you did the curve path, maybe this or that, or, you know, that thing, the kind of break the chord thing. So these were like shorthand names that they just used in the studio very naturally without thinking a lot, because as soon as they said the name of something, the dancer, Janine or Roz, they knew exactly in the score where she meant. So in a way, we just took those shorthand names and used them throughout the whole process of publishing this material online. So if you go to the website, you'll see these same names are the names we use to help you move through the material and compare and contrast and study the different recordings. So that's the process of naming. Again, very manual, very related to what we can take from the process itself without overthinking things or, you know, I think that's one of the advantages of having worked for many years with choreographers, is beginning to have a second sense for when names and other sorts of language-like things can work and when they can't work. I'm going to show you briefly a very different project. And the thing about this project, and I'm going to go online to the web for this. How are we doing for time? I think we're nearly done. I have to. Okay, Thembi showed you, and I invite you all to visit this journal. It's all published in English, but if you have access to the university, then you should have access to all the material in here. If you do not have access, then I suggest you could speak to Suzi, and I can send Suzi a zipped copy of everything if you'd like. I'll send her that anyway. I'll send you that anyway, Suzi, and then you can have it. We published a journal recently, which has many pieces of writing by practitioners, some theorists. Thembi's piece is in here with Carla, But there are many pieces that are written by practitioners, which are really descriptions of how they used the annotation tools, and many of them use the Peacemaker. And the only reason I sort of draw your attention to this, well, one reason is that there is not a lot of annotation activity out there in the dance professional field. There is a little bit, but of course there is a lot of video activity. So many people have access to videos, recording devices now. And so the video camera is almost ubiquitous in the studio and used in a very natural way. Things are uploaded to YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. But there are not so many people really annotating. So oftentimes people would ask me over the years, what are the annotation methods? And I would say, I don't know, because until more people are working with the tool and we see what they do with it, we don't really have anything that we can say about methods, because from my perspective, especially because it's artistic practice, highly particular, highly individual in a sense, not prone to generalization so much. I think this was something else Anton was referring to when he spoke about non-interference, was not to impose some sort of methodology on the users of the software. We didn't tell them how and what they should name things. We didn't present them a Laban package. We didn't present them a Deborah package. We've tried to create something which doesn't interfere or minimizes any sort of control structuring, which Thembi also referred to in terms of Derrida's archive fever. There is no question that our software does structure. You see it clearly, there's a visual structure, there is an aesthetics to it, but we have tried to make it accessible, free. So if you would like to use it, we can also give you logins and their tutorials. And with no imposition on the languaging dimension of this. We're not trying to suggest how it is that you should code up your own work. But in this journal issue, we've managed to collect quite a few accounts of people who've used it and have then described in some detail how they did that. And the piece that I think would be interesting, in part because of its culturally, it's not a Deborah work or a Bill Forsyth work. It's the work of a woman named Amelia Bonilla, who's has a I believe a Latin background, maybe South American background, and she's contacted a couple of colleagues who are working with indigenous dance forms. And this page, which is also public, so you can access it and read that article, they explore how it is that they can share those kinds of practices with a view towards also drawing attention to them. And Amelia speaks of it as a decolonizing kind of initiative, and also one that was done during the lockdown. So we're all thinking about that quite a lot in terms of what it means for our practices. And finally, then I will briefly show you the Threaded Fine project that I started out with. So I was in the studio watching this piece come together over a period of 3.5 weeks and recording many, many hours of material. And then I spent 10 days deciding and then confirming it and checking it with everybody who's in the videos, what to publish online to help give visitors to the website an insight into how this piece was made. So there's a bit of text here you read, it scrolls horizontally, there's a clear indication. Here are the names of all the performers from 8 to 76. I had my numbers wrong. You can watch the full final performances. You can dig into a learning section. Remember, I said first they learn things and then they practice and rehearse things. And there's also a section of about 11 interviews where I sit down with couples from the whole group and ask them about what it was like to work with the images, Rosie's language, how it felt to practice, and things like that. But the learning part, and this goes back to Deborah Hayes' score, for the learning part, for the annotations, so I made many live annotations, but in the end, I only selected a few which correspond, like with Deborah Hayes' project, to Rosie's score. So Rosie's score is also available here, so you can click on it and bring up her written score. So right there, you already have language. So in some sense, I don't have to invent any names. They're right here available for me. They're coming from the choreographer, they're coming from the artist. And I'll go back to the page. And when you can compare different days, so you can kind of compare how things were with different groups, all practicing the same thing. Here I've got a couple of the kids.
Something, but on this one it doesn't. So this one just.
So you'll hear Rosie has a microphone on, a very simple radio mic on her, so she's very clear. And I've just annotated here a few clear indications where her language intersects with what it is that they're doing, because I think there's a lot we can learn from that particular entanglement.
Just to go over it is the treading with the you've remembered it, beautiful, gathering the air in.
And you see, this may be a little hard to see, so I won't continue showing so much, but you can click through the annotations and compare what they're doing with others and get a sense of how the learning took place for this piece. And then go back to the beginning and check out the other sections. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And I feel like, you know, I really love that Thembi spoke of the choreographic coding labs and how it is that choreographers and coders begin sharing a space working together. Now, what I've shown you takes a slightly different, it works slightly differently in a way. It's not seeking to support that kind of collaboration, and those are really great, but just seeking to make those tools very accessible for people who maybe don't have access to those collaborations as well. And certainly what she said, what Thembi first said when you spoke of Motion Bank, Thembi, you said something that can't happen in Brazil. But one of my own interests has been trying to come up with tools that do not require that kind of resource, that really just are, and the Motion Bank, also the publishing system, which I haven't shown you, but it's also fairly easy to use. They are free. So if you would like a login, you can request one from us. We'll give you the login. Thembi has one. And then there are tutorials, and you can publish your own process online. And I think that's all from me.
Thank you, Scott. Brilliant research, Thembi, wow. Bom. Então vamos finalizar aqui. Thank you very much. I'd like to say thank you for Thembi, Scott, the students, Mônica, Aline. Acho que vou pedir para o Rodrigo botar todo mundo aqui nessa tela, tá? Por favor, do YouTube, para ver quanta gente querida está aqui. Também, se a Mônica chama a Mônica, please, Mônica and Aline, you want to say something to finish this seminar? This is the last lecture.
No, just we have to agradecer publicamente ao Rodrigo, que nos ajudou antes de encerrar.
It was a pleasure.
Obrigada, Rodrigo. Tá, para ficar gravado, disponível não, mas para ficar no YouTube, para quem está nos assistindo no YouTube. E a todos que compareceram e que nos ajudaram a fazer esse momento, né? Many thanks today for Thembi and Scott.
Obrigada, gente. Obrigada por toparem o desafio. Obrigada a quem nos ajudou a executar esse projeto. Obrigada, Suzi e Mônica, pela parceria. And thank you very much, Scott. Thank you very much, Thembi, for being here with us in Brazil. And thank you for all the other researchers that they came from different parts, from Canada and the UK. And it was a pleasure to having you with us. And hopefully we are going to meet soon in person.
Isso aí. Então é isso, gente. Muito obrigada. Universidade pública e gratuita para todos, na resistência, lutando, né, pela arte. Obrigada. Arte, cultura e educação.